Okay, and I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. So just a quick announcement. I am doing today's session from the car because I had to take my father to the doctor, and kind of ironically, we're doing recruitment boot camp. And the reason I had to rush his appointment is because the entire provider team quit where they were working. So they needed to get all the patients in before that. Also, please, apologies if you can hear the air or anything in the car. I'm in Florida and it's 103 outside. So just wanted to put that put that out there and really appreciate everyone's understanding with this. But today we're going to be talking about contracts and onboarding, and we'll do as we usually do. We'll put all of you in breakout rooms. We'll go through the content. So let's go ahead and get started. Alex, if you could go to the next slide. So, I mean, all of you have seen this slide, but again, just for housekeeping, the session is being recorded. We are going to be sending, or you're going to have access to the recording in the discussion board. All of you have been absolutely excellent in being present. You know, if possible, being on camera, feel free, again, use the chat, unmute yourself. We really want you to be engaged in this. If you do have any problems, please go ahead and contact Mariah. And then at the end, if you could fill out the evaluation, we would definitely be grateful. Next slide. So as always, we're going to start with a Mentimeter. So you can, again, I think all of you are used to this, but if you could go to menti.com, put in that code, you can use the QR code as well. And we're going to have just a quick, fun icebreaker. We'll have another Mentimeter question at the end that will be related to onboarding, but we always like to start with something a little bit fun. So we'll give everyone a moment. Just, oh, and thank you, Alex. I saw that Alex put the code in the chat. So if you want to switch over to Menti, I think we can go ahead and do that. Okay. So yeah. So what is the most venomous mammal that exists? And these are all real, by the way, because I realized when I wrote vampire bat, it sounded like a fake animal. These are all real mammals. Okay, so it seems like everyone is going with the Cuban, and I should have looked up how to pronounce it, Solenodon, I believe. And then 2 people said platypus, nobody said vampire bat or slow lores. And actually all of these are venomous, so I did want to make that point. So if we can go back to the slide, we'll see our response. And it's actually the platypus. So that is the big pictures of a platypus. I will say Alex inspired this because he has a chalkboard usually behind him and he drew a platypus. So that's where this icebreaker came from. But at the bottom, you can see there's a slow loris. There's also the vampire bat and the Cuban, the one that I can't pronounce. I just wanted to include that in there because I am Cuban. All right, so let's move into the presentation. And thank you everyone for joining in. You get to learn something new. The platypus also is one of the mammals that lays eggs. So that usually doesn't happen. All right, so let's put all of you, as we've done before, into a breakout group. Before we do that though, I did want to ask, does anybody have any questions that they want to share with the group or they want to ask now to the ACU team who's on regarding your homework? And I'll give it a moment to see if anybody puts in anything in the chat or wants to mute themselves. And if not, what we'll do is we will send you into breakout groups. So this is the prompt. Your homework from the last session was focused on the interview process, the questions, the on-site visit. So we want you to discuss what is one change that you plan to make to your interview process to be more inclusive. And thinking again around hiring and bringing in providers and staff that really reflect the community that you work with. But we also know there can be a lot of challenges around that. So, you know, brainstorming with your group would be great of what are some of those challenges as you're making those changes. And I don't see any questions. So Mariah, if we can go ahead and put people in breakout rooms, that would be great. All right, so we will see all of you in about 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, I think everyone is back in the room now. So I'm just going to give everyone a moment to see if there was anything they wanted to share, so that we could report out. So any interesting changes, ideas, things that you brainstormed to sort of overcome the challenges, or things that you may already be doing, you may have talked about that, that you would like to share with the group.
I will share. I think I was in group 1 and we had folks from Michigan, Connecticut, and Maryland. And it seems like we've already kind of revamped our interview process so it's the same. So people are asking the same sort of questions, and maybe the difference is whatever the role is. There's some same base questions and then the same, so everybody's asking legal, good, solid questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura, for sharing that. And yes, that is so important because it also gives you a baseline for all of the different candidates. So, you can say, yep, we asked a baseline, same questions across the board. And like you said, it makes sense then to adjust it based on the role, but having those baseline questions, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing. Group 2, anybody from group 2 or group 3? Oh, and I see we have a whole team on. Oh, yeah, I was about to call out all of you, and I saw you unmuted yourself.
Yes, hi, I'm Marissa, and I'm with Heritage Health. I think we were in group 3. I actually didn't pay attention to which group we landed in, but one of the team members in our group had talked about doing a matrix as part of their scoring for the interviews, and I found that very interesting, and she provided a lot of information to us on that, and I thought it was really great.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I mean, the more that you can.
Oh, it sounds like we lost Michelle a little bit, but yeah, sorry, group 3, if you want to repeat what you just said, and then we'll keep rolling until Michelle comes back on.
Sure. So in our group, we had one of the team members had mentioned that they added a matrix as part of their interview process. So they score everybody on the interview. They had, I think she said they had 5 scoring levels, if I remember correctly. We just thought that was really interesting, and I thought it was great too. So.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for reiterating that. And yeah, the matrix helping to keep everything consistent from interview to interview. And of course, considering whether or not you share what people will be scored on with them ahead of the interview or not. I know people do it different ways. Anyone else from group 3 before we move on? All righty. Let's see. There was a group 4, correct? Oh, no. Alrighty then. We will jump to the next slide here. All right, so the recruitment step ladder. Obviously, this second to last session, we're going to look at kind of interviews and contracts and the onboarding process. And so the onboarding process is really critical because once you find that new team member, you want to allow them to become part of the group. And there we go. And so getting them through the contract process and everything, and then into the onboarding phase where they start to really get a feel for the health center and for their role in it and how they're going to fit in with the team. And I think Michelle was going to talk about this a little bit later, but it's really important to make sure that that's not assimilation. It's not kind of making them conform to the team, but allowing them to bring in and add to the team and make the team a larger culture because of that new person coming in. So contracts, really important part early on in the onboarding process. And so you want to be very clear about what their work expectations are going to be. And obviously there is always going to need to be some flex in that, right? But letting people know what the expectations are as far as clinical hours or administrative hours and on-call hours, right? For our clinicians, if we're talking about other staff in different support roles, you know, are they going to have to be doing a lot of paperwork? So if you have, say, medical assistants or nurses, how much charting and electronic health record work are they going to need to do versus patient care? And then behavior, obviously, right? That's part of that culture, the culture of the team, and the culture that you're presenting to your clients when people come in. So just making them aware of what the expectations are and what's appropriate. You know, we, again, are going to talk a little bit later about you don't want it to be assimilation and making people conform to a team's culture. But obviously there are certain standards of behavior that we need to follow because we are serving a client base. And so we want to make people aware of kind of where that line is, right? You can't just be like, well, I'm just different that way. Well, no, if you're upsetting patients or not providing good service to clients, that's not acceptable cultural change. And then, oh yeah, office sites and locations and call schedule, right? That can be really important. And some of this may also be things you want to cover before you even interview or in a first interview, because some of these things might end up being deal breakers for people, right? If they say like, oh, well, if I'm going to spend half of my time at this location that is 30 miles away, that's too big a commute for me to manage. And so you don't want to get to the point where you have this great candidate and they're about to sign a contract and then you lose them, or they, you know, start looking for a new job 6 months in because they're having to, say, travel a long distance, or they're experiencing a lot more on-call time than they really expected. So some of these things that go into contracting, maybe don't wait to bring up until you're reviewing the contract for them to sign, but kind of look through that contract and say, what might catch someone by surprise? And what do we want to make sure people are okay with before they join our team? Compensation and benefits. Obviously, that is going to be a discussion you need to have and can be a place where sometimes negotiation will take place, but we also want to consider like how clear are we being in what compensation and benefits we provide and why, right? So as you're going through that contract, being able to tell someone, look, this is how we determine our pay level for someone coming into your position, and one that can help you on kind of the negotiation side, because it makes your position really clear and it also shows them what kind of flex it is. Then this also helps with equity, this transparency, right? There's an old culture in the workplace of being very opaque with what we pay people and why. And when we get rid of that opacity and start being really clear about, look, you have this much experience, you have this level of education, you are bringing these things to the table, we're going to reward you for that. We want to pay you fairly for that. But we also can't go beyond this certain level, you know, until you hit these certain benchmarks, or we're paying this other person more or less because of, you know, different qualifications that they have or things that you have that they don't. Being very clear about salary actually puts you in a better position to be able to offer people fair pay and to avoid some of these inequities that come from, again, we were talking about different cultures joining the workplace. People who come from different backgrounds may be more or less comfortable or understand salary negotiation from very different perspectives, right? And so we want to even that playing field. We don't want someone who's, you know, able to be really hardline in their negotiations and say, I don't need this job, to be able to bump up their salary when someone else coming in who, you know, is really excited about the job, but isn't ready to say like, no, I demand X amount of money, to lose out. And especially because a small amount of flex, you know, initially can end up being a huge disparity in salary over time. So just being really clear with why we're compensating people the way we are, so we can justify it to ourselves and so we can explain it and be transparent, I think is one of the most important things in the contract process. Professional development and expenses, right? A lot of, you know, all our clinical providers have to do CEUs and and continue their education and keep up their credentials. And it's important that we support that, and again, be able to explain to them how we're going to support that. Same thing with moving allowances. Are we going to pay people to be able to relocate? You know, again, if you're, instead of having someone drive, you know, 30 or 50 miles 1 or 2 days a week to work at an offsite clinic or something, you know, maybe they'll be able and be willing to relocate. Or if they're coming in from out of state, again, we might want to offer something as far as moving assistance just to make the position more attractive if we can. And then termination clauses, right? Obviously, if someone's not working out, if they're not a good fit with the rest of the team, if their behavior isn't fitting what our expectations and requirements are for people, all of that stuff, it's good to be clear and upfront about when people can be terminated and what their protections are and everything. I almost said next slide. I don't know why. I'm in control of the slides. So onboarding. Let's get into the onboarding process. Like I said, onboarding is not orientation, right? Orientation is like, okay, here's these offices and here's the, you know, HR department and here's the clinic, you know, and here's the people you'll be working with. Okay, great. Onboarding is much more of the, I like to think that we've heard of like hard and soft skills, right? I feel like orientation is the hard side of it, just the facts. And then onboarding is actually bringing that person in and letting them add on to the culture and everything in our facility. And so it's a really critical process, and it's not a quick one, right? It takes quite a long time to really fully onboard someone, usually somewhere from 6 months to a year, right? It may depend on the individual and on the team. Sometimes someone just clicks with a team. Sometimes it takes them a little longer to catch up with what's going on or to adapt to the way things work at a new position. But basically, it includes orientation. So just kind of understanding the basics of what they're going to have to do. Also getting them a really clear understanding of the expectations, right? When we say, okay, dress is, you know, business professional for these things and business casual for those things. Well, like, what do we mean by that? They need to see other people and kind of understand what the workplace culture is around all sorts of things. And then integration and culture, again, it's not assimilation. I think that's even on the next slide here. Yeah. We don't want to override what the person brings to the table and just make them fit the team that's already there. We want them to add something to that team. And that's easier said than done. It's kind of a complicated thing, right? They're going to have to maybe change or give up some ways that they have done things before, but they'll also bring new ideas and insights and processes to that team. And so just allowing for that exchange, and some of that's really critical on the leadership side, right? Providing an environment where someone can make recommendations or suggestions or say, oh, I do things this way because of this reason. And it's not just going to get shot down or, you know, steamrolled by the, well, that's just not how we do it here. But like having that open environment where it's like, well, let's explore. Can we do that? Can we make this other process work? Or how can we kind of adapt and grow as a team to be even better with some input from this new team member? Oh, sorry, I just realized my camera was off. There we go.
Alex, I just got back. I am
Okay.
so sorry, everyone.
Oh, sorry.
If you want to keep going, please feel free. I didn't want to just like jump in. Apologies to everyone. I am working from the car because I had to take my dad to the doctor, and apparently it was too hot and my iPhone shut down. So
Oh, no.
yeah. So
If you're back and everything's good, I'm happy to let you jump back in. We just talked about onboarding and how it's not assimilation, and then how part of that process is kind of having good leadership and good team dynamics. And so that kind of leads us into the communication slide that we're on now. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Wonderful, thank you. And thank you so much, everyone, for understanding the trials and tribulations of working from home. And thank you, Alex, for jumping in. So yes, And I got to hear a little bit of what Alex was talking about regarding the onboarding process, the importance of it not being a simulation, but really, when you bring someone in to your health center to work, you're bringing in because of their expertise and also the ability of how they're going to shape the culture, the changes that they're going to make. All of these things are very healthy for any type of organization. And it's incredibly important to have the communication practices in place. So as it says here, it really needs to be that continuous and the two-way communication. One of the fundamental things with any onboarding process is you want to ensure that supervisors are involved with that. And we'll talk about it in a few slides on, having regular check-ins with the new individual who was hired, those type of things. But you have to have a culture of communication set up in order to do that. So as it says here, as you're doing the onboarding process, when you get to probably around the 90-day mark, do a stay interview with the candidate. Ask right from the get-go how things are going, where they would like to go, how things are with their supervisor, with the role that they play. Why do they want to stay in the organization as they continue through the onboarding process and their career? So, really early on, kind of hitting on these things are very, very important. The formal and informal recognition as well, it's really fundamental to have that right from the get-go, because everybody likes to be recognized for the work that they're doing. And as soon as someone starts working, they're already contributing to that. And then, of course, listening sessions. And I don't know if Alex may have mentioned this, but the onboarding process should be a long process. It should be somewhere between 6 months to a year. So within that time, really having those listening sessions with your staff, seeing how they are, if they still like where they're working, if they enjoy what they're doing, what are some changes that they may be seeing that need to be put into place. Again, having a welcoming culture, a culture of communication and a culture of listening. Next slide, please. So why is onboarding so important? And I think some of the other slides already talked a little bit about this, but again, you're integrating a new employee into the organization. But you have to remember, you're not assimilating them. They are becoming part of the culture. They're changing the culture. They're contributing to the culture. So that's why all those other things we just talked about, the listening sessions, the stay interviews, are so fundamentally important, because that's where the employee feels like, yes, I made the right decision coming to work here. And when you have an onboarding process that's not really strong, or the employee feels disconnected, that is most likely when you're going to have turnover. So the more that you can keep someone once they start, really making them feel that this is the place where they want to work, the higher likelihood you have of retaining them in the long-term process. Onboarding also helps to set up clear expectations for what they're going to be doing. So part of that goes into that orientation process. So that initial, these are our procedures, our policies, everything that we're working on. But it continues throughout that 3, 6 months, and 1 year time span of what are their expectations for the role that they have, and their expectations for being in the health center, for working with their peers, working with their supervisor, all of these different things. It also allows for productivity to increase and just go much quicker. And this, again, it's because the person has the expectations, they know what they're supposed to be doing, they know who to communicate with, they know where to go. So it really just makes the whole process much easier. And for any of us, when we start a new job, it takes time to figure out a lot of those pieces. So the more that you can create that path for them through the onboarding process, the more productive they're going to be and the more likely they are to stay. And one of the important things I also want to point out, which may have already been mentioned, but onboarding is that bridge from the retention process, from the recruitment process over into retention. So you've already started that process of keeping people in the organization now that you've recruited them. And of course, it reduces turnover, which is exactly what we want. I mean, every single health center and every organization, healthcare or not, is having so much difficulty with turnover. But as you know, having turnover is incredibly expensive. So really investing in the onboarding process helps to not only save you that the financial loss you may have from turnover, but have you keep really great providers, staff, mission-driven individuals who want to work at the health center. Next slide, please. So I really liked this onboarding model. For some of these presentations that we've done, people have asked us, is there a type of model that is just really clear that we can follow? And this was through the Society for Human Resource Management, and I think I got that acronym correct, but it is very straightforward. It's all of these different pieces need to be in place in order to have successful onboarding. So again, and this is where you're going to see that bridge between the recruitment part and then retention. So you've selected your candidate, they're the right person, they've accepted the position. There's a lot of different pieces that need to be in place so that they really feel that they're fully integrated and that they know what to do and what their role is in their job at the health center. So they have to have that self-efficacy. That's incredibly important. Again, this is why we say a simulation is not the goal. People still need to feel that independence and that ability to lead and to show what they're able to do. They need to have clarity in the role. I mean, many times, and we've seen this, where someone gets hired, you have the job announcement, you have written out what their role is, and then when they get to the position, there's a lot of difference between what the job posting said, how the role was laid out, to what they're actually doing. So you need to really have clarification for what is their role, what are they going to be working on, and what is expected of them. Then the social integration, that's an incredibly important piece. So, we think about, as I mentioned, with orientation, you have to meet with HR, sign a bunch of documents, go through policies and procedures, the more formal onboarding part, which is meeting with the supervisor on a regular basis, but you're also spending a huge amount of time in a new job. I mean, we spend most of our lives in our workspace. So being able to have that time to just go talk to your coworkers, to get to know people that are outside just sort of that supervisory role, that they can go say hi to some other teammates, they can have lunch with them, and that there's time built into that so that people can socialize. And again, feel that they're being integrated into the culture that is your health center. So that's incredibly important. Sometimes we do forget that piece because it seems like, well, that's not really part of the job, but getting to know your coworkers, liking your coworkers, forming bonds is an incredibly important part of why someone would stay at an organization. And then finally, the knowledge of the culture. Every single organization has their own culture, their own way of functioning. So it's really important for people to understand that. And again, to contribute, there has to be the openness for them to contribute to that culture. And then finally, really putting all these pieces together is what leads to that successful onboarding process. Next slide, please. So I really like this, and this was from the same document where I got that process from, that when you think about onboarding, think about 4 C's. So compliance, clarification, culture, and connection. The compliance part, again, and that really is probably the one that's connected the most to orientation, where you're giving people sort of the basic legal policy, the rules, the regulations. If you're bringing on a provider, ensuring that they are credentialed, they have their credentialing and privilege in place, that they know how to use the EHR system, all of these different things. So you have that compliance piece again, so people know, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? Something as simple as showing them where the different exam rooms are. If you're in a new space, you don't know where everything is. I know one of my previous jobs when I started, one of my coworkers told me that they did not know where the bathroom was for way too long than they would have liked to admit, because they just didn't ask anyone. And then nobody told them. So, and it was a confusing office, so I understand you had to walk outside and all of this. So those are the type of things. It's really important, just sort of these basic ideas. Again, the clarification, as you can see, all of these work, together. Understanding expectations, roles, responsibilities, What is your organizational culture? What is your values, your diversity, equity, and inclusion values? How do you work with the patients that you work with? You know, understanding the community. There's so many different things than simply these are your roles and responsibilities of your job. And of course, the culture, the vision, mission, values. In the next session, we're going to talk about retention because I know that's something that everyone asked for. So one of the things that we're going to go into a little bit deeper is the mission, but it's incredibly important that, first of all, your health center has to have a mission, but that this is something that you revisit, that you make sure that it's still relevant to what your health center's values are, and that the mission reflects the way that you treat your workforce and what you offer them. So in the onboarding process, it's talking to the staff or the provider. What is the mission? What are the values? And how can they contribute to that? And then finally, as I mentioned, the connections. It's incredibly important for people to feel connected to their coworkers. So those interpersonal relationships, but also as health centers, you play such a vital role in your community. You want your staff and providers to also be connected to that community, especially if they're moving from another area over to go work there. If they're already from the community, they have that connection, but really utilizing that, you know, getting them out in the community, getting them to better understand the population that you're working with, the patient population, all of these things, having trainings around that, having them understand the complexities and the needs, the social determinants of health, all of these things, along with allowing them the time and the space to make connections with their coworkers. A huge, huge, huge component of retention. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to outline, I know this slide is a little bit text heavy, but I really just wanted to outline, just very straightforward, what are some things that you can do for onboarding to be successful? And for some of you, you may already be doing this. And if you're not, these are things you can start doing. You can select a few things to see if they work. One of the other things that I do want to mention is whatever you do for your onboarding process, make sure to assess it. Make sure to see, is it working? Is it not working? Where do we have to change? And this again goes back to asking the people that are going through the process, you know, what do they like? What don't they like? What would they like to see? What would they have liked to have learned more about in the first few months? All of these questions, again, are very fundamental. But just for some tips, assign a mentor to orient the new staff member. So oftentimes I think we think automatically the supervisor, but that doesn't have to be the person who is playing this role. In some ways, it's probably better that it's not. So whoever is the new hire can really feel comfortable just asking questions, and you know, they can be more formal or informal questions, whatever it may be. Definitely make sure to assign the different roles and the people who are going to be part of the onboarding process and have a realistic timeline around that. So for example, someone who's in the supervisor role, the first few months as part of their timeline, they're going to be meeting with the new hire every week. And then after 3 months, it's going to move to every 2 weeks or every month. But again, these are things that you want to write down and put in your comprehensive workforce plan. Have the expectations and the goals just right off the bat for the new hire. I mean, obviously don't make them feel overwhelmed, but really make them feel that things are clear and that they know the path that they're going to be taking. Social interactions, incredibly important. Make sure that they're not just formal, but also give people like the time to informally get to know each other. Those weekly check-ins, as I mentioned, or meetings, very, very helpful. Very important for the supervisor to be involved with this. And then you can taper it off and really see what works best for the new hire. Is it on a monthly basis? Did they like the weekly supervision meetings? Then you can keep that. So really, you know, you have to assess that, and it should be person by person because everyone's going to have different needs around that. As I mentioned, ensuring that you have peer interaction outside in the community. people need to really understand the population that they're working with and the community that they're providing these services to. So those opportunities, whether it be a more formal training or something more informal, should be part of that onboarding process, and providing them with support and resources that they may need to not only learn, the processes of working in the health center, but living in the community in which they're serving. And as you can see, this is a lot. So again, take what works for you, what works for your health center. But it's also important that this is why onboarding is a long process. This is not something that you can just do in a few weeks. You need to have a long time span, ideally a year, but if not, at the very minimum, 6 months. And again, putting that investment into this helps you retain the person that you identified as being the best for that position. And obviously, you don't want to have turnover immediately. Next slide, please. So we are going to go into our last Mentimeter. And basically, I'm just going to ask everyone, how long is your health center's onboarding process? And in a moment, Alex will go over to perfect, to the Menti slide. And there's no wrong answer, a right answer. It's perfectly fine. Everyone's going to be at a different stage with this. But I think I just really wanted to gather a sense of where everybody's health center currently is regarding onboarding. And then when we come back, I want to see if anybody who has an innovative onboarding process or something that they really have established that they know that works for them, that if they could share with the rest of the group, we would really, really love that. Okay, so not sure. And then working on developing an onboarding program. Great. 1 to 3 months. Wonderful. And I think we have, okay. We're getting a few more. I'm going to give it a little bit more time. I wanted to leave about 10 minutes at the end to be able to go through this. So we have, I believe, 4 responses right now. And nobody from what and I know that we still need a few more responses, but nobody has a longer onboarding process at this moment. And if you do, please go ahead and put it on there, because I did want to ask you about that. And you can also put it in the chat if you prefer. So Alex, were there any other responses, or was that the
I believe that was, oh no, I'm sorry, we got one more, I think. 3 to 6 months.
So 3 to 6 months. Okay, perfect. So it seems like most people are working on developing an onboarding program. So I think that's excellent. And again, taking those first steps, take everything step by step, seeing what are the expectations that you want from a new hire? What do you want them to get out of this process? How do you want it to work within a retention model? All of these different things. And then just putting in those different tips that we talked about. Can you have somebody be a mentor? Can you ensure that the supervisor meets with the person on a weekly basis? Are you able to have, whether it be the supervisor or someone from HR, do a stay interview or a listening session? Again, the most important thing with onboarding is the communication part, and then also ensuring that people understand what their role is, what they're doing, that they're not facing all these barriers to their job, and then they feel like, well, why did I take this position? Why am I here? Okay, so could we go back to the slides? Thank you. So I did want to ask, does anybody have a unique part of their onboarding process that they would like to share with the group? And I can call on people, but I'm going to see if anybody has anything before I do that. So one of the, and as people gather their thoughts, one of the health centers that they had talked about, one of the things they focus in their onboarding process is already talking to people about their career paths and their career ladders. which can be an incredibly powerful tool because the person coming in already knows that you're investing not just in them coming into the role that they've been hired, but to really be and build a career in their health center, be a part of the health center and build a career there. So that's something that is fairly unique to some onboarding processes because we usually don't think about that till later on, sort of as the person has been there a little bit longer. But I do know we had a health center who shared that, which I thought was excellent. Other health centers, as part of their onboarding process, especially when we look at MAs and DAs that have such high number or such high rates of turnover, are doing really kind of integrated training programs in there to make sure that they're able to take the next step that they need in their career. So again, that career path, career ladder part is really helpful in the onboarding process. So does anybody have anything really unique? And if you don't, that's fine too.
I'll
You
go.
don't?
One of the things that I've been doing, because we have so many people moving here for positions, is a transplant lunch once a month. So we get all of our people who just moved here to go to one of the local restaurants that maybe was suggested by someone who's been here for a while. And we just all get together and talk about how it's going, our struggles. I am one of the transplants, so I'm commiserating with the other people. And then we kicked it off at the Chamber of Commerce in their community room and had the director join us. So it's been real successful.
Thank you for sharing that, Dorothy. That is such a great idea. And you're incorporating so many of the different pieces, like that social interaction of, bringing people to better understand the community if they're new to it, talking about the challenges that they're facing. And I'm sure right now, especially, people are facing a lot of challenges. So, you can talk about what they're facing within their position, but also in general. And I think people really appreciate that empathy, all of those things. So thank you for sharing. And I really like that because, yeah, you are like, one lunch fits in a bunch of stuff. So that's the other thing. It doesn't have to really take up too much time. It should be something that really, as you're working on it, as you're building it, integrated into the processes of your health center, integrated into the culture of something that you just know. This is what's going to happen when we have a new hire. Okay, I don't know if anybody else would like to share. I do want to thank everyone who shared today. Always appreciate that.
I would be happy to share.
Oh, yes.
And I'm with Heritage Health. We recently brought on an onboarding specialist. Riley's her name. So we're developing our program right now. We have a lot of great ideas and we're hoping to push out a lot of things. But some of the things we are doing, I don't know that are necessarily unique, but when we bring on staff, we send them a welcome to the team card ahead of time with a little gift card in it for them to go somewhere and have a nice treat with their family to celebrate. The other thing we do is we have, I'll call Heritage Health swag, where they can get a vest and a nice backpack when they join, because we want them to feel like they're part of the team right off the bat. So that's one of the things we're doing right now, but we have a lot more on our agenda to do to get even better, really do some of those touch points that you were talking about throughout the years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I think anything you do is really unique because you're building it for the culture and the needs of your health center. So that is so important, just to welcome people, give them those small little things. It shows that you want them there, they're going to be integrated into the culture, and that you really recognize them just from the get-go. So that's wonderful. So in the last minute, I just want to go through the last few slides really quickly. So we kind of went through questions earlier. If you could go to the next slide. So we're going to have an assignment regarding contracts and onboarding. I will go ahead and put that in the discussion board. As always, if you have any questions, any TA needs, please feel free to reach out. Next slide, please. So our final session is actually next week. I know we've been doing every 2 weeks, but this one will be next Thursday, June 30th. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into the retention pieces, and then we're going to wrap up. And by that time, we're going to look at the homework, look at everything that you've put together and how you've really started that comprehensive workforce plan for recruitment and retention. Next slide. And I know we're at time, but just a plug for our conference. So we do have our ACU conference coming up the first week of August. You know, it's going to be excellent. So many great sessions. So if you would like to register, please go ahead. And we do have it hyperlinked on here. And then just the final slide. And then I believe, Mariah, yes, the evaluation is going to pop up. So if you could just fill that out before you head out. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone. Thank you so much for understanding my being in the car today, having to take my dad to the doctor, losing connection. And thank you, Alex, for picking up when I got kicked out. And I hope everyone has a really wonderful day.